Sometimes, the greatest horrors were the most ordinary masks. It was with that bitter realization that I began my investigation into Dennis Rader, the man the world knows as BTK. BTK. Three simple letters that together carry the weight of one of the darkest nightmares in American criminal history. Bind, torture, kill. Those words didn't just define his brutal method of murder. They also captured the sick pleasure Rader felt in carrying them out. Between 1974 and 1991, Wichita, a quiet city in Kansas, was gripped by a series of crimes so cold, so meticulously planned, that they seemed to defy all logic. Entire families were destroyed. Women were stalked, studied like prey, and hunted inside their own homes, the very place where they should have been safest. The killer seemed invisible. He left no clear trace, no apparent motive. And perhaps most terrifying of all, he could have been anyone. A smiling neighbor, a friendly coworker, a faithful churchgoer sitting beside you on a Sunday morning. For decades, the city lived under the shadow of a ghost who didn't just kill, but delighted in playing with the police, the press, and the community at large. He wrote letters, sent newspaper clippings, created pseudonyms for himself, demanded recognition as a true serial killer. And the most disturbing part, after years of silence, he came back. As if he missed the spotlight, as if the need to be feared, to be remembered, was stronger than the desire to stay free. For a long time, investigators, psychologists, journalists, and locals tried to build a profile of BTK. Was he a monster? A madman? An evil genius? The truth, as you'll see throughout this story, is even more terrifying. Dennis Rader was an ordinary man. A husband, a father, a respected public servant, a leader in his Lutheran church congregation. He was the living embodiment of the phrase, "Evil wears the face of normality." Today, with access to files, interviews, letters, and the detailed investigation that led to his capture, I'm going to tell you everything I uncovered. Every step, every mistake, every macabre detail. Because to truly understand what happened in Wichita, you have to face head-on what so many chose to forget. But first, make sure you're already subscribed to the channel, because I'm sharing stories like this every week, and you won't want to miss them. Now back to it. When I started digging into the life of Dennis Lynn Rader, an uncomfortable feeling stayed with me the entire time. I didn't find the typical image of a psychopath you might expect. Instead, I found a portrait that was disturbingly ordinary. Too ordinary. Dennis was born on March 9th, 1945, in Pittsburgh, Kansas, but he spent most of his life in Wichita. The son of Dorothea and William Rader, he grew up in a typical American household. That classic picture, a modest home, friendly neighbors, public school education. Nothing seemed to hint at the horror hiding behind that quiet boy with light-colored eyes. From a young age, Dennis displayed disturbing behaviors, but always subtle enough to avoid drawing attention. Later, in his own words, he would confess that from childhood he felt sadistic impulses. He enjoyed strangling small animals. He fantasized about domination scenarios, where he would tie up and control imaginary victims. All of it, of course, hidden behind the veneer of normality. Rader served in the United States Air Force between 1966 and 1970, a period during which he attracted no negative attention. He was disciplined. He followed orders. The kind of person who earns trust simply through rigid, rule-abiding behavior. After returning to Wichita, he built what appeared to be an exemplary life. He worked regular jobs, first in the supermarket sector, then in the field of electronic security, installing alarm systems in private homes. Later, he secured a job as a compliance officer in a small town called Park City. The irony? Part of his job was ticketing neighbors for violating safety regulations. In 1971, he married Paula Dietz, a shy and religious woman. They had 2 children. They attended church every Sunday. Dennis was active in his religious community, even rising to become president of the Lutheran church congregation. From the outside, he looked like the perfect citizen, an ordinary American living an ordinary life in an ordinary town. But inside, the monster was already awake. The frustrations of adult life, an unfulfilling job, the lack of recognition or attention, only fueled his darker desires. For Rader, controlling other people, turning them into objects, wasn't just a fantasy. It was a necessity. In 1974, the mask began to slip, and the world, still unaware, was about to witness the birth of one of the cruelest serial killers in history. His first attack would be brutal, methodical, and completely outside the patterns that local law enforcement had ever encountered. And so Dennis Lynn Rader took his first step down a path that, decades later, would place him at the center of one of the largest criminal investigations of the 20th century. When Dennis Rader finally committed his first crime, it wasn't a spontaneous act. It was calculated, planned, executed with surgical coldness. It was January 15th, 1974, a seemingly ordinary morning in Wichita. Too ordinary. The Otero family consisted of Joseph, Julie, and their children, Josephine and Joseph Jr., a hardworking Latino family, with no enemies, no debts. Just simple people trying to live a quiet life. But to Dennis Rader, they became the perfect project. He studied the family's routine, watched their schedules, learned where they worked, where the kids went to school, and when they would be most vulnerable. He set the plan in motion with the patience of a predator who knows his craft. That morning, he broke into the Otero home. Armed, calm, authoritative, he subdued each family member, tied them up with makeshift cords, psychologically tortured them, making it clear that they had lost all control over their own lives. Joseph Otero, the father, was strangled to death in front of his wife and children. Then, Julie. Then, young Joseph Jr. and lastly, Josephine, the little girl. What Dennis did that day defies understanding. And it's important to be clear, he didn't act out of financial need. It wasn't a crime of passion. There was no external trigger. It was pure sadism, pure control, pure pleasure in subjugating, tying, torturing, and killing. This cruel signature would be repeated, with variations, in his subsequent crimes. Rader gave names to his fantasies. He called his future victims projects. He selected women, usually young, but not always, who awakened a specific urge in him, the desire for absolute control. He was meticulous. He observed habits, learned routines, wrote down notes in small notebooks. His tools were simple, improvised ropes, duct tape, plastic bags, sometimes even the victim's own clothing. He always began the same way, subjugation, and always ended the same way, complete domination over life and death. In many cases, he intentionally left traces of his presence, clues for the police to find. Other times, he took small trophies with him: jewelry, underwear, personal belongings, souvenirs of his victory. But killing wasn't enough for Rader. He wanted to be remembered. In April 1974, just months after the Otero massacre, he sent an anonymous letter to the local newspaper, the Wichita Eagle. He detailed the crime with information that only the true killer could know. And for the first time, he gave himself a name: BTK. Bind, torture, kill. The letter was cold, devoid of remorse, devoid of empathy, a silent scream for recognition. He wanted the world to know, I exist. I am BTK. The police, stunned, realized they were dealing with something they had never encountered before. This wasn't a burglar. This wasn't an impulsive psychopath. It was a methodical predator, patient, arrogant, and perhaps most terrifying of all, perfectly capable of hiding in plain sight. Over the years, BTK evolved. His methods grew more sophisticated, his plans bolder. He invaded homes in broad daylight, committed murders in busy neighborhoods, challenged the police openly, as if utterly convinced of his own invincibility. And throughout it all, he remained the smiling neighbor, the respectable church member, the compliance officer who cited homeowners for minor violations. It was as if he lived two perfectly separated lives, two masks, and neither revealed the real monster underneath. While the authorities struggled to find a pattern, Dennis Rader was already thinking about his next project, the next home to break into, the next life to destroy. And Wichita was slowly sinking deeper and deeper into fear, a fear that would last for decades. Why Wichita? Bueno, Wichita es hundia cada vez más en el miedo. Un miedo que duraría décadas. The murder of the Otero family in January 1970 before left the Wichita Police Department in shock. Nothing made sense. No clear signs of robbery. No obvious suspects. No apparent motive. From the very beginning, the case felt different, and it would be only the first of many. In the following months, more murders occurred. Victims with similar profiles, women usually alone at home, attacked brutally and methodically. Authorities tried to find connections, but everything seemed disconnected. It was as if the killer didn't follow any visible logic, and maybe he truly didn't. At least, not a logic any normal mind could comprehend. Meanwhile, the city began to change. Wichita, once peaceful, became gripped by fear. Home security system sales skyrocketed. Women glanced over their shoulders while walking to their cars. Local newspapers started publishing advice columns on how to protect yourself from an unknown killer. BTK had become a collective phantom. What no one knew was that the killer himself was following every news story, every headline, every police bulletin, and more than that, he fed off the attention. In October 1974, Dennis Rader sent a letter to the local TV station, Cake TV. Its contents were deeply disturbing. In it, he wrote, "It's hard to control my urge to kill. Maybe you'll call me a monster, a psychopath, or simply a son of the devil. That's fine. I accept those names." He once again detailed confidential information about the murders. And once again he signed BTK. It was as if he was playing, taunting, publicly challenging the police. Despite this, the case eventually went cold. No new solid leads. No advanced DNA technology at the time. Investigators were completely in the dark. They built psychological profiles. They interrogated hundreds of suspects. They analyzed every letter, every anonymous phone call. Nothing. BTK was smart. He knew how to confuse, how to mislead. He changed tactics, altered his signature, changed his victims. It was as if with each new attack, he stayed one step ahead. Over the years, the killer maintained an intermittent relationship with the media. He would disappear for years, then return with a new letter, a new trophy, a new provocation. In one of his most infamous communications, he even suggested possible names for himself. What should my name be? BTK? The Wichita Strangler? The Bind Killer? I'm open to suggestions. It was a game, a macabre, sick game, and the city was as bored. With every unsolved crime, the pressure on law enforcement grew heavier, and so did the fear. Women in Wichita changed their way of living. They no longer opened the door to strangers, stopped going alone to supermarkets at night, installed guard dogs in their homes. But no precaution seemed enough, because BTK chose. He planned. He decided. He was the living embodiment of irrational fear. By the 1980s, the BTK case seemed to vanish. No new letters, no new murders bearing his signature. Some thought he had died, or been imprisoned for other crimes, or perhaps he simply stopped. But what no one knew was that Dennis Rader was merely dormant, still watching, still desiring, and sooner or later, his insatiable hunger for control and glory would surface again. When he did return, it was in a way both stupid and chilling. In 2004, almost 30 years after the first murder, an anonymous letter arrived at a local newspaper. Inside, details about an old crime, the 1986 murder of Vicky Wegrel, details that had never been made public. Signed once again, BTK. He was back, and this time, he would leave the clues that would finally lead to his downfall. For almost 2 decades, Dennis Rader remained silent. The city of Wichita tried to move on, tried to forget, but ghosts don't vanish so easily. When BTK resurfaced in 2004, the dormant terror in Wichita's collective memory came roaring back, stronger than ever. The new letter sent to the press left no doubt. It was him. The style, the intimate details of the crimes, the subtle sadism woven into his words. It was all there, and with it, the game began again. Excited by the renewed attention, BTK began communicating more frequently. He sent letters, packages, newspaper clippings, even small personal items belonging to his victims. It was as if he was finally receiving the fame he had always craved, and had no intention of giving it up. But it was precisely that thirst for recognition that sealed his fate. In February 2005, Dennis Rader made the mistake investigators had been waiting for 30 years. It all started with a question. Rader wrote to the police. "If I send you a floppy disk, will you be able to trace it back to me? If the answer is no, put an ad in the paper saying Rex, it's all fine." The police lied. They placed the ad, telling him everything was fine. Dennis, trusting them blindly, sent a floppy disk to the TV station KTV. A small gift, a fatal mistake. The disk was analyzed immediately, and hidden within its metadata, a crucial detail. The document had been created by a user named Dennis, and saved on a computer at the Christ Lutheran Church in Wichita. A quick search revealed that Dennis Rader was the president of that congregation, married, father of 2, public employee, respected. But for the investigators, it was the end of the mystery. With that in hand, the police moved swiftly and quietly. They obtained a DNA sample from Rader's daughter, using a previously archived university medical test. They compared it to DNA found at old crime scenes. It matched. BTK finally had a name, a face, an address. On February 25, 2005, Dennis Rader was arrested while driving home for lunch. The monster, who had hidden behind the mask of normality for so long, was finally in handcuffs. His reaction? Cold, without resistance, without surprise, as if, deep down, he had always known this day would come. During interrogation, Rader didn't deny anything. He didn't invent excuses. He confessed. Confessed to everything, every crime, every detail. He spoke the way someone might describe a routine to-do list. Without remorse, without emotion. The only emotion he showed was pride. He revealed that throughout all those years, his need to kill had never disappeared. It had only been contained. He spoke of his victims as projects, as if they were nothing more than objects. He described the murders step by step, the bindings, the tortures, the strangulations, with chilling clinical precision. Terrifying, incomprehensible. In court, he pled guilty to 10 murders. And in one of the most disturbing moments of the trial, he described each killing, one by one, without ever showing a hint of regret. Sentenced to multiple consecutive life sentences, Dennis Rader was finally removed from the free world. But can evil really be confined within concrete walls? Or does it simply change form? Because what we discovered about Dennis Rader after his capture was just as disturbing as the crimes themselves. And that's what we'll explore next. When Dennis Rader was finally removed from the streets of Wichita, the city breathed a sigh of relief. But the true extent of the horror was yet to be revealed. Slowly, through testimonies, files, letters, and interviews, the world began to uncover who BTK truly was. And what came to light was even more disturbing than anything imagined over the years. Rader wasn't an irrational monster. He wasn't a psychopath incapable of distinguishing right from wrong. He knew exactly what he was doing. And worse, he knew it was wrong. He just didn't care. During his interrogation, he described each murder the way someone might describe household chores. He would select a victim, meticulously plan every detail, and steal complete control over their lives. The pleasure, for him, was in deciding who would live and who would die, in being to his victims a kind of twisted god. The contrast between Citizen Rader and BTK was so stark that even seasoned investigators reported feeling extreme discomfort listening to him speak. At work, he was considered competent. At church, seen as devout. At home, described by his children as a strict but protective father. And yet, when he recalled his crimes, his eyes would light up. His tone would shift. His posture would relax. It was as if, deep down, Dennis Rader only truly felt alive when he was in the role of the predator. Another chilling detail, how he documented his secret life. Inside his home, authorities found maps of invasion routes, notebooks with surveillance notes, handcrafted sadomasochistic costumes, handwritten letters, addressed to the media and police, but never sent. It was as if he lived permanently in two worlds. The world he showed to society, and the world he hid, nurtured secretly by his delusions of power and control. The damage caused by Rader went far beyond his direct victims. The surviving families shattered. The entire city traumatized. In many homes, the mere thought of an unlocked door or an open window became synonymous with terror. And the harsh lesson Wichita learned was that true evil doesn't always wear a grotesque mask. Sometimes, evil disguises itself as normalcy, as kindness, as faith, and that makes it all the more terrifying. Today, Dennis Rader is serving 10 consecutive life sentences in Kansas. Isolated, forgotten by many, but his story remains a dark reminder. Not every monster roars. Some simply smile. And perhaps the most unsettling question that lingers after all of this is, how many Dennis Raders are still out there, hiding, living ordinary lives, just waiting for the moment to reveal their true face? At the end of this investigation, one certainty remains. Dennis Rader was not a genetic mistake. He was not an isolated aberration of fate. He was, and is, a dark product of humanity's terrifying ability to hide monsters beneath the skin of normality. BTK taught us something we would rather not have learned. That evil, true evil, doesn't announce itself with screams. It doesn't parade through the streets with chains and bloodshot eyes. It hides. It adapts. It molds itself to society's expectations. And when we least expect it, it acts. For over 30 years, Rader walked among us, smiling at neighbors, attending church services, inspecting properties, all while secretly planning his next crimes, all while feeding the silent fire of his narcissism, his insatiable need for control. The BTK case is, above all, a brutal reminder that evil is not some distant concept, not a myth reserved for horror stories. Evil is real. It lives among us, and it can wear the mask of kindness, efficiency, even faith. Wichita was never the same again, and in a way, neither should any of us be. The story of Dennis Rader shouldn't just be told as a crime story, but as a warning. A silent warning: trust, but always observe. Believe, but never blindly. And above all, protect yourself. Today, BTK rots in a cell, but the scars he left on bodies, on minds, on souls will never truly fade. Every letter he wrote, every life he took, every fake smile he flashed, all of it stands as a grim monument to what human beings are capable of when the mask finally falls. This was the story of Dennis Rader, the BTK, an ordinary man with an unusual thirst for control, pain, and death. If you made it this far, let me know what you thought of this story in the comments. Also, tell me if you've ever heard of anything similar happening near where you live. Don't forget to subscribe to the channel. There are plenty more chilling stories on the way. And remember, sometimes evil is hiding where we least expect it. Thanks for watching, and see you in the next video.